Good morning, everyone. This morning, we're joined by novelist, memoirist, and essayist, Aminatta Forna, director and Landon Foundation chair in our Landon Center for Poetics and Social Practice right here at Georgetown. And Aminatta, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It's such a pleasure to have you as a part of our conversation series. So let's get started. As I mentioned, you currently direct our Landon Center. Can you share more about the mission of the Landon Center and the center's priorities as we begin this new year?
Well, the Landon Center is, as you said, the Center for Poetics and Social Practice. What that means to me is examining how we use the written word in practice, how we use the written word in order to understand the world, in order to analyze the world, and in order to change the world. I mean, that's the reason I got into the whole business of being a writer. I wanted to understand the way the world works, and I wanted to share that understanding with as wide a public as possible. So what we do at the Landon Center is we host a series of talks throughout the year, and these culminate in a big symposium. Ours is coming up next month, and we'll talk about that later, but it culminates in a big symposium in March. We also have the Landon Fellows, our very own Landon Fellows, and I always encourage students to apply, who throughout the year study texts, write prose and poetry, and also in different times, in other times, would meet with our visiting writers and have dinner with them and talk about writing, talk about prose, talk about poetry, and talk about all the magic that it does.
And the Landon Center is named for Patrick Landon in the Landon family. Patrick was, I think, 1960 graduate of Georgetown, and has been a strong supporter of the arts and humanities for many, many years. And we're the beneficiary of his wonderful philanthropy. I know you've worked closely with the Landon family and foundation over the years.
That's right. Yeah, I actually met Patrick Landon for the first time when I went to Santa Fe, which is where the Landon Foundation is based. I went to give a talk. They have their own magnificent talk series. And we sat down and had dinner together afterwards with some other people, got on very well. He's very, very closely connected and involved in the work that we do. You know, I share with him and with the board all the time what plans I have, and we're going to talk about those, I know, Jack, but, you know, I talk about the plans that I have, where I see the center heading, what worked well, what maybe didn't work so well, but, you know, we're in constant touch over it. It's a real, it's really great to have that sort of support behind you when you do something like this. You know, you know, having more minds involved in it and everybody kind of working towards the same goal.
Now you mentioned some of the virtual readings and talks that the Landon Center has hosted this past fall and again this semester. Any favorite highlights or moments from this year's series? Are there particular ideas or insights that come to mind as you think about what we've been through?
Well, funnily enough, when I became director of the Landon Center a couple of years back, what I decided to do was introduce an annual theme. And our theme this year for 2020-2021 is This Land. So, I mean, chosen for all the obvious reasons. The country, there's a lot to say and think about America at this particular time. Sure. So what we do is we ask all the writers who come and speak to engage with that particular subject. And that's what the symposium in March will be focused on. So if you think about this land, and by the way, I was really pleased when it was sung at the inauguration, not at my request, I have to say, but could have been. You know, we're looking at this land from the point of view of the border. We're looking at this land from the point of view of the many different peoples who live in it. We're looking at this land from the point of view of the environment. We're looking at this land in all kinds of different ways, also historically, the narrative of this land. So, I mean, a couple of highlights for me, I'll just pick them out. Valerie Luiselli, who is a MacArthur so-called Genius Grant Award winner and National Book Award finalist. And she, one of my favorite books of the last year has been The Lost Children Archive. And one of the things she and I talked about in conversation was the idea of writing as witness. You know, that Nadine Gordimer said that novelists and poets, prose and poetry writers, writers of the imagination, brought to the events of this world the seventh sense of the imagination. And it's through that that we begin to understand what is happening. And I talked to Valeria about once, and actually I was on my way to the Landon Foundation and my plane stopped off, and a group of children got onto the plane, and they were dark-haired and very small, mostly girls, some of them carrying very small babies, all wearing these dark blue sweatshirts and pants. And I didn't know who or what they were until I read the Lost Children archive, and I realized that they were very young deportees being sent home. So we talked a lot about the idea of writing as witness. Another highlight for me has been Javier Zamora, whose first book, Unaccompanied, was about being a child refugee from, I think, El Salvador. And he came over at the age of 9 on his own, abandoned by a coyote in the middle of the desert. And the kids had to make their way across. So it chimed very much with what Valeria was writing about. But, you know, he brings the idea of witness home personally, you know, that, and there's a wonderful line in one of his poems about, you know, about the promises of politicians and the way in which undocumented young people have been used, dreamers have been used as political footballs. And then most recently we had Shane McRae and Vivi Francis, and they had a conversation towards the end of their readings, which really resonated with me. I think Vivi Francis said, "I am both traumatized and invigorated." And, you know, I know exactly what that means, traumatized and invigorated. You know, as writers, we've met our match, right? You know, we've met our match. As creative people, we've met our match, and that's very invigorating, but at the same time, these are sort of quite scary times. So I think those have been a few of our highlights. And then I will just say that we have coming up in April, our very own Caroline Fauché, who is going to be reading her new collection of poems and also talking about her memoir.
Thank you. Thank you. Now tell us about March. Tell us about the symposium in March.
Well, I'll tell you about March last year first.
Sure.
So March last year's symposium was going to be 3 nights, 3 writers, one of which was Salman Rushdie. And then I went to New York in March, early March, thought about it very hard, made entirely the wrong decision, went to New York just as it was closing down. But anyway, it gave me a sense of just how dramatic things were, you know, what was really going on. Because I think, you know, from being in Arlington where I live and on campus, you know, DC hadn't really been touched in the way that New York had at that time. We only had one friend who had to go into quarantine, and they had been pretty far removed from the source of COVID. But when I went to New York, I thought, no, we really have a problem on our hands. And I took the decision to cancel the symposium. But I was able to persuade Mr. Rushdie to come back again this year. So we're doing a sort of rebranded version. It is This Land, but along with Salman Rushdie, we have Terry Tempest Williams, who's an activist and a writer writes about the environment. And we also have Joy Harjo, who, of course, as you'll know, is our first Native American poet laureate. So we have each of those people in conversation, each of those wonderful writers in conversation on 3 nights with different interlocutors, one of whom is Maureen Corrigan, who's a professor of English, and then the other in our department. And then the other one of the others is Razia Iqbal, who some of you may remember, may hear at 9 o'clock in the morning on NPR. She's a wonderful interviewer. So that we're having 3 conversations. And actually, I think this is going to work very well for where we are at this point, because, you know, normally the symposiums, it's a whole day and it's all But actually, I think a day of panels is not quite what anyone wants at this point when we're all on screen. But actually, our evening events have been getting very big audiences, sometimes 200 plus. And we have people dialing in, that shows my age. We have people joining us from all over the world. So I'm very excited about that. And then just because what we're going to do this year is we're going to launch a seminar series called Beyond Identity. And if you'll give me a moment, I'll just talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Well, my country went to war, Sierra Leone. I've got two countries, Sierra Leone and Scotland. Scotland is still okay. Sierra Leone went to war 20 years ago, and it was a terrible war and caused a huge amount of suffering. And I've written about war ever since. And I've written about conflict, and I've talked to other writers who've written about war and conflict and seen what's going on, saw what went on in their countries. And so, the lesson of Sierra Leone, it may seem like a country that's very far away from here, that's very different, but actually many of the same things manifest themselves wherever we are in the world. Fractures between groups of people. And I had many long conversations with a Bosnian writer called Alexander Hemon, who lived through what went on in the former Yugoslavia. And at certain points, I've also had conversations with friends of mine who work for peace and conciliation organizations and conflict resolution organizations. And actually, I have a friend who comes through DC quite a lot, used to come for meetings at the White House. And one day I said, why are we not paying more attention to what's going on in America? Right, I'm not saying it's going to be Sierra Leone or Bosnia, but there's definitely a lot of conflict at the moment. And so we've decided between us, the Landon Center has teamed up with two organizations that specialize in conflict resolution and peace and conciliation. One is Beyond Borders and based in the UK, and one is Beyond Conflict, based in Boston. And we're launching a series of seminars that will begin on March the 18th, 1 o'clock on March the 18th. And it's called Beyond Identity, and it's the view from abroad, what writers and people who negotiate or think about these things, but from outside the United States, when they look into America, what is it they see? So we have Monica McWilliams. She negotiated the Good Friday Agreement. We have Ibrahim Rasool from South Africa. Both, by the way, have been received awards or been fellows at Georgetown in the past. Ibrahim Rasool was instrumental in setting up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And then we have the writers, Sasha Hemon and Elif Shafak. And Elif Shafak has written a great deal about the rise of authoritarianism in Turkey. So we're bringing writers together with professionals and diplomats. And that's our first event, kicking off this series. The series will take us out of America, off to the London School of Economics, to the Beyond Borders Festival in Edinburgh, to Beyond Conflict in Boston, and then back in March 2022 to the Landon Symposium at Georgetown. So it's quite a big undertaking, but I think it will be worthwhile.
Oh, thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for your leadership in putting that together. Now, in addition to all of this, you are an acclaimed novelist, most recently the author of Happiness, and you've got a new book out this May, The Window Seat, Notes from a Life in Motion. Can you talk a little bit about this new collection of essays, the ideas you're exploring, the process of working on essays like this?
Well, Notes from The Window Seat, Notes from a Life in Motion is a collection of essays that I have actually, I think the oldest one is about 10 years old. And then the newest one comes from earlier last year. And I've been writing them over time. I've always found writing essays, I always think of them as a palate cleanser between novels. I write a novel and it's just like this long dream and it takes so much out of you. And then in between novels, I'll usually write a couple of shorter nonfiction pieces. And at some point, the person who edited my collection for me said, a couple of years back, he said, why don't you do it? You should do a collection of essays. And actually, as I say, he edited it in the end for me. So the essays, what would I say? I'll say they're joined together by voice, right? So I've lived in a lot of different places in the world. My parents come from 2 different countries, from Sierra Leone and Scotland. My stepfather was a diplomat. I've also traveled a lot for work. I used to be a journalist. I was a BBC reporter. I made a lot of documentaries in wonderful places like Timbuktu, which is still one of my favorite places on earth. So the essays reflect a life that has been lived all over the world and what I've learned from that. And the title essay is called The Window Seat, and it's about the window seat in the aircraft and how, I don't know why anybody watches movies on an airplane. To me, I can sit in the window seat and I can simply look at the view for 8 hours, or 10 hours. And it's really all about flying. And so funny enough, here we are now. The first reviews are coming in and people are saying how nostalgic the book makes them feel, for the fact that we can't do that any longer. But it really is that view of the world, and the essays cover a range of subjects. I talk about my family in Scotland. We're from the Shetland Islands, actually. We all have Viking blood. I talk about my family in Sierra Leone. My father was very much like Obama's father, one of the first Africans to go to a Western country to study in that era of the 50s and 60s. I talk about my own adventures with insomnia, and I also write about urban wildlife, which I have a great deal of around here, everything from rabbits to raccoons to deer and coyotes. So there are a variety of different subjects, but they're all held together by my observations of living in the world and seeing how people react to the same things in different places.
And that'll be out in May.
May the 18th.
All right.
And I'm doing a lot more Zoom.
Now, all of us have had to adjust our daily lives, and our literature can often be a place where we look to find comfort or inspiration. What are you reading, or what's fueling your creative work at this time? Have there been particular writers or works that you found inspiration in during this moment?
Well, I have a 10-year-old son, so I'm not doing that much reading at the moment. He hasn't been in school for a year. We did, when school closed, actually the first thing I did with him, because we homeschooled properly before they'd gone online, we read Things Fall Apart. We read Macbeth. Actually, this is not going to sound immediately very comforting, but it gives me comfort. I tend to feel much, much better when I understand things. Okay. So, to which end, I have been reading, and when I say this doesn't seem immediately comforting, you'll see why. I've been reading Fevers, Feuds and Diamonds, which is about the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, and which I was heavily involved in because my family were caught up in it. And In the Company of Men by Veronique Tadjot, and she's an Ivorian, very well-known Ivorian writer, writing also about the Ebola outbreak, very much touching on the things I'm talking about. Paul Farmer is the person who started Partnership in Health. His book is very scientific, it's very fact-based. Veronique Tadjot's book is well-researched, but it's a work of fiction. So, this takes us right back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, the idea of witness and the idea of what the imagination, a writer's imagination, brings to a work. And Ebola and COVID are essentially non-identical twins. Right. One is, they're both very devastating diseases, but in different kinds of ways. But they come out of the same human behavior, which is we chop down too many forests. That's what we do. We chop down too many trees. So actually reading these books has given me a great sense of comfort, even though the subject matter is frightening, because I can now see the trajectory of how we got where we are. And that's one of the things as a writer I very much like to do. But I do read a little bit of poetry. I'm reading a wonderful collection called The Park by John Freeman. And it's just about the changing nature of a park during the different seasons. And, I think poetry poetry is so fine that a lot of people, I have a friend who's a war correspondent, and he says, I don't read novels, I read poetry, right? Because that's what he takes with him. He can, in a few stanzas, you have something that you can really derive a great deal from. But otherwise, that's probably about it, yeah. I'm not doing that much writing at the moment, mostly researching.
Got it. Got it. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking this time for our conversation together. In closing, is there a message you'd like to share with our larger university community?
I think reading about things and understanding the way the world works is where resilience comes from. This is really a well-known psychological fact now. It's really accepted within the psychological community. That's where we get resilience from. We get it from narrative. And so that's what I devote my life to. But the other thing that I would say, which I think is a really important thing to be doing right now, is just dance a little. Just dance a little. Do not be ashamed. Put the music on in your kitchen and dance a little. And, try not to take the world too seriously. We're in difficult times, but there's no harm in having a little fun as we go.
Well, Aminatta, thank you for joining us this morning. It's wonderful to be able to hear your reflections, and we're all so grateful for the many ways you enrich our community. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.